And we're rolling. Yay.
Heyo!
Hi,
Rolling.
hi.
I'm starting the timer.
Alright, so this is post 9, our last discussion post for the quarter. Except for 10, but
Jeez, this quarter went by like that.
in a snap. Woo.
Okay. Alrighty, where do we want to start today?
Let's start with, maybe we should start with Bix and Cal and like
Okay.
define them and talk about how they're related.
Okay.
Do you want to turn the fan off so it's not bugging you?
Oh no, it feels good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's all
Like,
right.
Alright,
So we just have to talk a little louder so that
Okay.
make sure that you can hear us.
I think we defined it last week too. Maybe?
We can just recap it.
Alright.
Recap. So, how do Bix and Cal relate, and what are some misnomers that teachers have about them or how students use them?
Alright, so I'll start us off. I guess Bill, Bix, wow, words. Already starting off a little rough, but okay. Bix is social language, so pretty much just the communication skills students use in their everyday life that I guess help them through the day. And that I wouldn't say is less grammatically correct, but I guess in
Or
our
less formal.
yes, less formal. Yeah, I like that. Less formal, casual, just how you speak to just talk with others to get meanings and messages across.
Mhm.
And then CALP is the academic part of the language, right? So it's like, so it's not your social language, it's that academic language that includes, all the features, which we can go through a little bit later if we want to. That's more formal,
Writing.
spoken in writing, so
Like
yeah,
that.
articles, science, history, etc.,
Math.
math.
Some
Oh,
novels.
man.
Some novels.
And so I feel like both of them, students need both in order to function successfully in school and in society. It's like you need your social language to help you communicate with others on a deeper level, because if we only communicated through academic language, I feel like it would just be really
Yeah. And so
Dry
we,
after a while.
yeah, and so we talked about how Bix takes like 2 to 3 years for an EL student to get, and CALPS takes 4 to 7.
That makes sense though. It's because a lot of that is colloquialism and humor within that area, regional humor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't understand that region, how would you understand that humor if you
Yeah.
can't even speak the language correctly?
Yeah.
yeah.
I think what you guys were saying about how it'd get really dry, I feel like the same would be vice versa. So if we only used
Social.
if we just use our social language, kind of, what's it called, like, oh wow, small talk, or if you never ever talk to anyone about deeper thinking, like more or less, I mean, deeper knowledge of like the world or things going on, you just kind of get boring. Like, oh, how's your day?
That's
Oh,
true.
good. Let's talk about popcorn today.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, it just would feel really shallow, and you wouldn't, I guess, build that, this connection. Because I feel like, being teachers, we talk about academic things, and if we just were talking about trees, we'd be like, do we know this person?
For instance, going back off that tangent. From I Love Modern Family. I don't know if you guys ever watch it. It's one of my favorite shows. But Gloria, they have Gloria's character does a lot of jokes that she thinks is correct in the Americanized humor, but because she's Colombian, she doesn't quite get it right. Like, I just looked one up because I thought it was funny, and this one says, "He scared the baby cheeses out of me." She thinks she's saying the right thing,
Yeah.
and she kind of got it, but it's not quite right.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that can happen and definitely does happen with our ELL students, where they think that they're being really funny, which they are, but they're not quite there yet. Like, they're
grasping,
almost
yeah.
there, kind of a thing. And that's one of the reasons why I love her character, because you're just like, Gloria.
I feel like that's really good to note, because that's totally the whole social kind of aspect of it. She gets sort of it, but she doesn't get, I guess, the academic, meaning and why that, makes sense
Right.
behind certain, linguistic jokes.
Well, it's like what we were talking about in 432 was that, students who don't understand the academic part of the language, with especially like figurative language, like metaphors and similes, and those sort of things. Like, they're not going to understand what you're saying. Like, if you are using personification as in, like, the moon is smiling tonight, we're going to be like, what are you saying? The moon doesn't smile.
Or the man in the moon, even just saying the man in the moon. When I was a kid, I thought there was literally a face in the moon.
Yeah, so
There
it's
isn't.
like they need to understand, I feel like, both facets of the language in order to really be successful within that language, which makes it even more difficult because, I mean, when you learn a language, you learn it socially for the most part. Like, you don't learn, I guess, the academic side as easily when you're not in school.
Yeah.
And so then you're ending up having to learn this academic piece in class.
That's a good point, though, because a lot of our ELLs are bouncing around all the time. Like, they typically are moving often. And so to get that, picking up on what you were just saying, like, picking that up naturally is not going to happen unless they're in that academic setting. And in order for them to be in that academic setting, the parents have to be able to enroll them in a spot. And in order to enroll a kid, you have to be in a certain area for so long. And it's kind of a catch-22 for these poor kids.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, I don't remember what chapter or video or whatever talked about it, but it was like, native English speakers, like myself, for example, we learn academic language at home. Like, I learned a lot of my academic language through my parents because, I mean, they're both well educated. And so for ELLs, they don't have that luxury because they might know the academic language within their own language, like Spanish or Korean or Chinese or Punjabi, but they don't know it in English. And so there's that, huge gap there that you end up having to, like, fill in.
I feel like that kind of goes into, like, dominance, I guess. So, like, when ELLs are in the American school system, they just have to learn it, I guess, not necessarily academically, whereas when we learn, like, Spanish, we learn it from the core of just being academic. Whereas when they're learning it, they have to learn it both, but taught in a, I guess,
Unless you can see it, but
I
you want to know that,
but they learn it in a way that I feel like doesn't really meet their needs. It's, okay, I mean, I'm teaching you and maybe you don't understand this, but, you'll get it, but it's like, will I?
Yeah.
Will I? Because I'm learning this language and I'm learning new concepts. And
all at the same time.
All at the same time, and in not a, really, like, concrete, specific way.
Yeah. I think that ties into the fact that teachers mistake, ELL students, like we talk about all the time in class. Just because they can have a conversation with you doesn't mean that they understand the content that's introduced to them in classrooms.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, because it's like, like we talked about, it's both sides that have to go into academics. I'm reading a book right now. I think it's called, oh my gosh, it's Lisa Delpit, and it's Teaching Other People's Children, or something like that, or just called Other People's Children. And there was a section in there about teachers in the inner city, and I mean, these students aren't ELLs per se, they're American born, they just have to be African American and have that sort of dialect. And the students themselves, like, when they're on the playground, their knowledge of English is so heightened because it's the social aspect, when they're talking to their friends and they're enjoying their things and they're speaking in their own dialect, and teachers don't play to that in the classroom. And so, teachers are like, well, these kids are dumb, they don't understand English, they can't write correctly, and it's like, well, they just don't have that academic piece. They have plenty of the social piece, but we need to help them reach
The academic.
both.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important.
I feel like this kind of ties in with what I was reading, kind of on Brick and Mortar, which is pretty much the specific types of language. So, like, I guess the brick is the more what specifically, I guess, a good example, I guess, would be, like, in terms of, like, science, it'd be, like, the specific sciencey words that are relevant, like metamorphosis or meiosis. And those, like, specific words, if they're not, like, I guess, if they're not common to, students who don't know that terminology, it's going to be hard for them to learn that on an academic level.
Right.
So if, like, everything's so foreign, like a specific language a teacher's teaching and just doesn't make sense, that's going to be hard. I mean, if you go into a science, even us going into a science class or, math class where you just don't know what a certain word means, it makes it harder to learn. And I feel like that's kind of what ELL is. It's like, okay, these terms, that's just how it is, and you should know what these mean. And if that's, not your first language either, that makes it even more difficult.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of makes me think of the video from last class where the kids are in the bilingual Mandarin school, and the teacher was just talking to them and just like, okay, she's talking about a backpack, okay, and then what else is she talking about? And I feel like it's kind of like that. It's like, here are all these words you don't know, but you're expected to know what they mean.
Understand it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's definitely like a barrier right there.
Yeah, I can definitely relate because I always just thought that I was really bad at science and math, but after, this class, it makes me wonder if the reason why I'm bad at it is because I'm not fully, like, proficient in calcs. Because BICS, like, I've been here, like, 10 plus years, so, you could, like, assume that I'm good at English. But, like, even in history, I was always an English and history person, but history is just, like, telling you what happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to, like, essays or, free response questions or something like that, it was really hard for me to read in between the lines. And for me, I just thought I was being dumb or something, or I didn't pay enough attention in class. But it does make me wonder after this post, like, if it's just, that gap that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if it's just that gap of understanding English.
Yeah, because your parents don't speak English at home,
Mm-mm.
so it's like you can relate in a way that they probably obviously pass on academic language in Korean. When you're speaking Korean, but it's different when they don't speak English and they're not speaking it to you constantly,
Mm-hmm.
especially growing up.
Yeah.
I feel like also, there's that cultural, like, difference too. So, like, I don't know, thinking about different words in different languages, and so maybe your parents don't know what the English word for some, whatever you were learning
And they
was.
oftentimes don't.
And it's like, I feel like when I was in, like, like early middle school, like late, it was like propaganda. What is propaganda? It was like just like foreign word. Like, what does this mean? And it was just like thinking about that in another language. It just makes me think like I wouldn't know what that was. Even in English, I was just like, what does this mean? How does this relate to people? How do I make sense of this concept? And I feel like there's also, it's like not only do we not know what it is in English or another language, it's hard for us to relate it to ourselves and to our own culture. So if it doesn't even, like, maybe there's, okay, like, I'm not gonna say like a telephone, but like something that's just like non-existent in another culture, that could be like a factor too.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I don't know, like tuk-tuks, or they're kind of like taxis, but they're they're in Thailand, but they're like
Tuk-tuks are so cool.
It is tut-tuts.
and then there's like rickshaws and is it Indonesia? Something. There's like different. They're like similar
They
things.
have
but
rickshaws
there's
in India too.
Yeah.
They have a multiple places. There's like different names for like different types of like transportation that people, but like people, but usually bike or like the rickshaws have bikes, and then like tuk-tuks have actual
Motorized.
motorized words. Yes, but they're like slightly different, but they're still like local forms of transportation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just different.
Well, like in Seattle, they have the Uber cars or the Lyft cars that can come around and get you, which is basically a taxi service, but it's a really cool app. If you're ever in Seattle and need a ride, you should look up Uber or the Lyft, L-Y-F-T, apps. Because it was so convenient. We went. It was so convenient. And you can watch the car coming to you, like on your
That's
app,
cool.
and see how far away it is. You see the person that's going to be picking you up and what their car looks like before they get there, so you know what to look for. It's kind of cool. It's interesting.
I feel
Yeah, that was a total tangent. Cannot completely
No,
at all correct.
no, it related to what I was talking about. It wasn't a I feel like this really makes you like step back and be like, okay, as a teacher, I need to be able to talk and teach in a way that's, I guess, not really complicated for students to learn things. And it's like you bring what you got taught and how you learned into the classroom. So using complex words, you're gonna have to like try not, I mean, you'll have to teach vocabulary, but you know, you can teach in a way that students can understand it and maybe practice it and use actions to, you know, understand it. And but it's just so, it just makes me think it's so difficult to make things simpler from how I guess us being so much more knowledgeable than we were kids, but like making everything less hard. Not dumbing it down, but just making it easier.
Simpler.
Yeah, easier to understand.
Yeah, well, I mean, and on that, like, because obviously you want to make it easier for them to learn and understand, but at the same time, like, they do need to gain those
They need to
skills
challenge,
in order to, you know, write a dissertation or go get a job or something, or write a resume.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like how, I feel like there's this tough bridge of, like, how do you teach ELL students English proficiency when you have to hit, like, all these nails on the head, you know, get all your ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so many of those, but yet you need them to understand it as you're going. Like, you can't just spout out, like, the words metaphor and simile without actually explaining running through what those mean and giving them examples. And so it's like, you know, you have all these things that you need to do as a teacher in order to get them to learn the academic side or the calc side.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like, I mean, it's tough. There's a lot to do.
Definitely.
Like, there's so much to do and not so much time.
Yeah.
Never enough time.
On an unrelated sort of note, it's like makes me think of how like proper and more grammatically correct people used to be, and why we like left that.
Yeah.
To whom are you referring to? Like, you don't hear that too often. Most people don't say.
What I
who
find
or
interesting
what.
Who are you
along
talking
those
about?
lines is when you think of Shakespeare, nowadays, if you think of Shakespeare, you think of it being like this completely uppity and
So
snooty
arch, blah,
and
blah,
the proper way. But he wrote to the masses. He did not write for the mucky mucks of the time. He wrote for the people in the slums, for the commoners, and the humor in that was what was the humor for the commoners of the time. Whereas now, half the
It's
people,
like placed up.
it's so
Yeah.
it's like swapped. It became like for the mucky muck, the academic, which I find that fascinating. The whole language evolution and yeah, I guess it's just language evolution is what I was looking for there. It's just really fascinating to me, and the fact that I'm related to Shakespeare is kind of cool. So, and I live in apartment 2B or not 2B.
I love that.
Oh, grammar, humor.
But it's like if we were, I don't know. It makes me think like how were things taught back then? Were they? I mean, it's more grammatically correct because things were just so much more
Complex? Were they more complex then, or is it just
people spoke in a way that
I think it was just, like, honestly, it could have just been the culture, like, even, you know, 1950s, 1940s, like, early 1900s. You know, you taught kids in such a different way than we're teaching now.
very true?
And it's not like it was better. I mean,
not
you know,
no, it wasn't.
you learned grammar and you learned how to speak, quote unquote, correctly, or I
Right.
guess prescriptively,
Mm-hmm.
over, you know, social language. And now social language is so much more valued
Yeah.
as a part of, like, culture and tradition and identity. And so I think that's probably why. It's just that, you know, times have adapted to diversity.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic because we should be learning from others.
Yeah.
And valuing differences.
Speaking of valuing differences, do we want to
What a good segue.
segue? I don't know if that was a good segue actually. Do we want to talk about capitals?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, like, what kinds of the 4 capitals? Oh my gosh. Social,
Social,
Linguistic.
linguistic,
cultural,
knowledge.
Okay.
Alright.
Let's start with knowledge.
Okay.
Okay. Love it.
I feel like that kind of touched on what I was saying about you bring in what you have learned and what you know, but also, I guess also what you've been taught in school. So that really influenced, because, well, I guess talking on the teacher sense, I guess a lot of people say that, you know, you teach how you've been taught, which is, some people are like, oh yeah, you know, that's bad because, you know, a lot of us are not the best teachers in the world.
I'm so the opposite. I am trying to teach the way I was like
taught?
I'm trying not to teach the way I was taught, because
Yeah.
the way I was taught was so
Not good.
poorly done. I'm from Marysville, Washington, and if you know anything about the way that they used to do the core standards at Marysville, we all got screwed in the early 2000s. Like, I graduated in 05, and when I first went into college and I tried to do a math placement test, the person that did the test for me asked me where I went. Like, they asked if I was from out of state or if I was even from a different country because of how bad I did. And I was like, no, I'm from Marysville, Washington. And the moment Marys came out of my face, they're like, oh, Marysville, I'm sorry. That's huge to have someone from a completely different district understand the fact of how crappy they taught us. It's awful. Like, they did not do a good job, and so that has affected the rest of my academic career with how poorly I was taught.
You have less of that capital, you have less of those knowledge, resources in certain aspects, you know, that...
I can't fall back on that because there's not that foundation that's needed.
Yeah.
I can go on forever about how much I hate Marysville, so we won't go into that.
You know, like, in versus, like, my high school in Colorado, our school district was known for being, you know, a very affluent school district. I mean, we were. And my high school was the best in the state as far as our test scores. And so my knowledge capital and what I've learned in school and how I was taught was so much higher than most other schools that it does give me an advantage, you know, in certain aspects, and a disadvantage in others. Like, you know, we were good at academics, we were horrible at sports and understanding others.
Like the empathy, understanding others, or
like we were called the bubble.
Okay, so you just were okay.
Oh my gosh, I can relate to that so much.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, my knowledge of academia and all that stuff is there, but I feel like, I mean, maybe not mine, but I feel like my high school population's capital in, say, like, social or, like, a wealth of understanding of others and, like, how the world functions outside of Highlands Ranch, Colorado is very minimal.
That's definitely like mine. We had what's called the Bellevue bubble. It was
you
like
do. It's true.
Yeah. I just looked up my high school. It's 4th within Washington and number 174 in the U.S.
Where did you look that up? I really want to look up Marysville.
U.S. News.
U.S.
I just looked up Newport High School Bellevue ranking.
Okay.
But yeah, no, my high school was all about test because I don't know because it was, I mean, I don't want to play into the stereotypes, but it was 47% Asian, 47% white, and then everything else. And so it was very an academically focused school. There was so many like APs, and you were pressured to take APs, and if you weren't, then it was like, why aren't you taking them? Like, you were known as being a slacker or something. And then, but I can relate to you because I don't want to teach how I was taught, because in Bellevue, you're always constantly thinking about yourself. Like, you need to better yourself so that you can get into this college, and UW was like the big, you know, get into the school. And then, but they never cared about you as a person. I had one teacher in high school who I can go back, and he cared about me more as a person than, you know, academics. And I feel like lacking that connection with students is so, like, crucial in the students' education. And that's why I think connections are way more important than I mean, academics is important too, but, you know, you can't have the student think academics is important if you don't have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Which is what I did.
If you're just spouting academic after them, they're just like, it's like the Peanuts, the thing where you're just in and out. So I just looked at Marysville. Are you ready for this? The 2008-2009 ranking. was out of 346 schools, it was 204. Oh, it makes so much sense as to why I suck academically. So,
yeah, it's like knowledge capital. I feel like it's capital in general. Like, you know, it's kind of something that you can help a little bit. Like, you can gain more knowledge in certain areas. You can, you know, look at your culture. You can ask about it. You can interact with more people. But, you know, it kind of just depends on where you are and where your parents are from and how you're raised. And it's like,
on like a side note, do you guys feel like, I mean, I know I kind of know the answer to this question, but I feel like expectations has a really big impact on how you do. So like, I wouldn't say I was the smartest person when I went to Singapore, but like, because our school is so, I guess, like, you need to do well. Like, that was like our
school in Singapore.
Yeah, because there's definitely that whole kind of tiger mom thing in Singapore because it's an Asian country and it's
I don't know what
predominantly Asian.
tiger mom means.
Oh,
It's like donate or else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much it's you have to do this. Pretty much.
You have to do
And
well in everything.
You have to be smart. You have to play an instrument. You have to go to a good college. You have to end up doing this when you're young. You have to be successful. And if you don't, like, you're just kind of.
And why are you
You're
here?
kind of ashamed. Yeah, like,
Okay.
you should not, like, that's just what you have to do.
Yeah.
And you're expected to do it, and you can't say no. It's just how things are. And so in Singapore, it's kind of like that. I mean, different, obviously depends on the family, but the whole school's mentality is kind of, you need to do well. And if you don't, it's not like an or else, but it's definitely like, you will have consequences, more or less.
Right. Yeah.
And this will affect your future kind of thing. And I feel like that had such a huge impact on me in school and doing well. I don't know, and I feel like that really influences what you gain from school.
yeah, it's just the whole attitude.
Just that whole attitude just gives you like a different outlook and a different motivation. And I mean, yeah, in movies it's like, oh, you know, people whose parents don't challenge them, you know, they have more fun or whatever. Or not exactly, it's just movies. But like, and then people who have parents that do care. I can't even remember what I was talking about. But like, there's all these like semi-stereotypes that are not exactly true, but like some parts of it definitely have truth to them. And
So
that's
sorry.
No. And that they influence how you're gonna be. I remember what I was thinking. So a lot of people, like in movies, are like, oh, people who, you know, have wealth and they have their parents, you know, pay for things.
So they're more fluent.
They're more fluent, but then like once their parents aren't there, they're like, oh, I feel like I can't do anything because, you know, you ever always have things done for you and
The whole silver spoon
the
thing.
whole. I feel like there's kind of that mentality because Singapore is a really wealthy place, but at the same time, like, a lot of people's parents are so wealthy they're not there, so you have to do everything, more or less, because teenagers don't have cars in Singapore. If you want to go out, you gotta get there, more or less. So it's just kind of this. It's just such an interesting thing, like how. Like your expectations can really influence who you are and kind of having how ELLs. I wouldn't say like not all of them. Their parents don't have expectations, but it's also hard for some parents to have expectations if they don't understand what you're learning.
So I have two things. Directly off of this, not even dovetailing, but directly off of this, the relation to the movie that I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in this before was the one with America Ferrera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Real women have curves, or real girls have curves. Oh, sorry, my lungs hate me right now. And the expectation from her family was that she was going to work for the family company, not you are not going to college, even though she was exceedingly intelligent and could very easily go to college just on her intelligence alone. And her teacher is trying to show the parents that that's will, in the long run, better her and better the family. But the mom is very like, no, we need her now. We need her in the store, in the blah blah blah.
Right.
So I think that has a lot to do with it too. And then of them like actually wanting to put that effort forth, because if they know that they're just gonna go end up working for the family company or whatever, why put that effort and energy into the schoolwork when it's not in the long run going to be beneficial for them with their culture, family culture, which I think in turn is a good segue into oh my gosh, like our
Oh no, that makes
thingy.
sense. Kind of
From
how
our families.
how that definitely makes me think on how like a lot of ELL parents don't know English. You know, they aren't very proficient in English, so they kind of lack that academic language because that's just, you know, they assume you're not speaking English and they're not the ones going to school. Their children are.
Right.
So they only maybe, you know, acquire that social language. And so their children, you know, coming from their parents, kind of go to the cultural capital.
That's
but
what I was trying to think of. Thinking
they-
cultural capital, I couldn't.
Like,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
word.
Yeah, they only come, you know, with what their parents come through, and then they acquire social, and then, you know, the whole struggle with academic we were talking about.
Yeah.
But that how their family really influences their learning, or their just initial learning.
Well, and to me, the cultural capital and like the linguistic capital are super close knit.
They're
Yeah.
very, yeah.
Because it's like, you know, as a child, when you're growing up, both of those are how you're raised. So your cultural capital, what you're learning from your parents' education level, etc., is something that you can't really control. But it's just what you're being taught at home. And then your linguistic capital is like the language and your communication skills that you're being taught at home. And then when you get into school, you have more social interactions, you know, then you gain more, obviously.
Yeah,
But it's
more
like,
social.
it's like if your family is, you know, of lower economic status, or, you know, from a different culture, or they speak a different language, and then you come into mainstream schools, it's like you have less resources than those other kids to draw upon when you enter a classroom and when you try to communicate with each other and, you know, base your knowledge off your life experiences and like what you've learned already. So like there's this just huge gap between ELLs and, I mean, not just ELLs, like low SES students and students with, you know, maybe parents who have disabilities or who are out of work a lot, or, you know, all these different things. Then, you know, students from affluent communities who are middle class, who are white, who are, you know, this, that, and the other. Like there's this huge gap between, you know, what they've been taught at home, what these students have been taught at home, and as a teacher, you're trying to bridge the gap between these two things.
Also, I just had like a insightful thought.
Yeah,
it was like
Eureka!
It was like
Light bulb, guys, light bulb.
It was.
The best.
Huh.
That's why we're becoming teachers, is to have those.
Yeah,
Not
I
for
know
ourselves,
that we
for
call
children.
it the achievement gap, but it doesn't seem fitting to call it a gap because, wow, insightful. Like, okay, because English is the dominant language in America, it just doesn't feel fitting to call it a gap because they already have knowledge in another language or different cultural backgrounds, and it's like just because they don't know English in such a proficient way, that means they have, think of it as like a metaphor or like a metaphorical gap in their brain. That's like, you aren't to the level that we are, but that's just because they're just from a different culture.
Yeah,
or a different
They
language.
are at the
And
level
it's
of
like,
their own culture.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
try a role reversal, please.
No,
Yeah.
in her book, I remember
It's
the
like,
very
it's not
first
really a
week.
gap.
The very first week, we were reading about those different, ELL students, and there was a boy from Kenya, and he didn't have any education, but he knows so many other things. But when he comes to U.S., although he knows so many things in Kenya, none of the things that he knows is useful here.
I remember
Mhm.
that.
It's like, why would you consider, like, why would, and I underline that, because that stuck out to me so much. Just because someone may seem dumb in the U.S. doesn't mean they're a dumb person.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
Even if they can't, like me right now, if they can't put words together correctly, does not mean that they are not an intelligent person.
mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, many of the ELL's parents came over here because they wanted to have that American dream. They wanted to better their family, but where they were, they had really well, not well paying, or else they wouldn't have come over here, but they were like in the higher stature of things, like they were doctors or whatever, but now they're still working in a hospital, but they're the janitor, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Whereas they could be performing these surgeries just as well, but because their medical degree is from a different country and whatnot, it's not the standards that are needed here. Yes, medical standards are a huge thing and we need to uphold those, but still it doesn't mean that those people aren't intelligent just because they can't have the conversation with you
Mm-hmm.
in our language. If you get a translator, perhaps maybe it actually isn't the same level.
And I feel like this is, I feel like we touched on this, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, maybe every week.
Every week,
Sorry.
maybe.
Who knows? But it's like, your proficiency in language, and especially your proficiency in academic language, does not equal your intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
My mom made the mistake of telling both my brother and I when we were really young. I think I may have even said this before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. That your ability to spell has absolutely nothing to do with your intelligence level, because both my brother and I are horrid spellers, and I love spell check for that very reason.
spell check is the best.
But I am a horrid speller because I am very phonetic. So if I were Ukrainian, where they use a lot of, like, the entire language is phonetic, the entire thing is set up phonetically, I think that I would be an excellent speller. But in English, because we borrow from so many other cultures and languages, it doesn't make sense. Like, seriously, pneumonia, why is there a P? Pterodactyl, why is there a P? Why? There shouldn't be. No.
No, and it's like, I don't know, it's just, and it is the achievement gap in the sense that, that's what people see, and the dominant culture in the U.S. sees, ELLs and people with lower socioeconomic status and different culture and different ethnicity as lacking in intelligence because of their language proficiency or their cultural knowledge or their capital, in any of the 4 categories. And it's not true. It's just that, their capital in the American English culture is so much lower, but their capital in their own dialect and culture and language and whatever else they have might actually be the same level as yours.
Or more.
It's just different.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even with people born in the States that might not, so that's our timer, and I said it for 38 minutes, so we got one more time. But, like, for instance, in the 40s and 50s and 20s, and so 50s and above, well, I guess behind, like with the African Americans and how they spoke not the same level or dialect or whatever as the whites, and so they were thought of as not as intelligent, and that was not the case. Sorry, I'm looking right at the book The Help right now, so that's what made me think of that. The whole you was kind, you was smart. Like those parents sucked at being parents, and she was so much better of a parent to those children than the actual parents were. But because she didn't speak correctly, they didn't value the words that she was saying to these children.
Yeah.
And those are really important things to be saying to children.
Yeah.
You are smart, you are kind, you are a wonderful person. Those kids need to hear that all the time, or else they're not going to believe it.
It's a whole
Kind of unrelated, but related. So today, us 3, when we were having our meeting for 452, there was Annie's friend didn't know what ELL stood for.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh
so,
my gosh.
so this whole quarter, I've had to explain what ELL is.
I've
And one of my
explained it
YMCA
20
parents
times.
didn't know what a quinceañera was. Yeah.
That surprises me.
But,
It feels like that's much more of a mainstream thing
right?
now.
Yeah, anyways, that
To
was
know
kind
what
of,
a quinceañera is.
yeah, that was kind of unrelated. But it's like, I feel like it's so easy for people to jump to conclusions that, you know, people who don't speak English is dumb because they don't know what ELL is. We had to explain to this. He didn't know what it stood for. He didn't know what it was. And we have to say, like, if English wasn't your first language, then you're, you know, ELL, English language learner, you're learning English. And it's just crazy to me that there's people out there that don't know how much it is of a struggle that English is a difficult language to learn, and people struggle in school because of that.
Which I thought was really cool that the guy said, the very guy that asked what ELL stood for. And when we explained that to him, he was like, yeah, because English is like the hardest language to learn.
Yeah,
And
I was like,
exactly.
yes.
You're not an ELL student. Yes.
Yeah.
No, because I feel like, because I'm taking, 2 ELL courses this quarter, all of us are, and I'm my LLC major, I tell people that I'm majoring in language, literacy, and culture, and that I'm an ELL endorsement. They're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. It's
And
like,
so I feel like I'm
mouthful.
having to explain it so much more.
Yeah.
And
So
that-
you're like, I'm in Woodring College of Education, where the elementary education, the language, literacy, and cultural major.
ELL
Like,
endorsement and a
good
testimony.
Lord.
and a minor in communication.
and reading
Yeah.
endorsement.
Yeah. But it's like,
Just throwing a few hats on there, guys. No worries.
yeah, no, but it's like people don't understand that this is a growing thing, and an ELL population is so big now because our schools are becoming so much more diverse. Like,
You and I are going to be the minority in
Yeah.
the next decade or two.
No,
Like,
literally, they said in 2020, like,
Yeah.
over 50% of classes.
are going to be
are
color.
going to be of color, and so like to me it was like, I told my family like, oh yeah, I'm getting an ELL endorsement, and they were just kind of like,
What's that?
they were like, what's that and why?
Yeah, why would you do that?
What's the point? Why don't you just teach? And it's like, well, I can't just teach. And like,
Yeah, you
What do you
can't
mean?
just do that.
Just
Just
teach.
teach.
Yeah,
Like,
people
what does that
just
even
think that
mean?
teaching is an easy job, and it really
It
isn't.
really isn't.
It
There's-
isn't.
It's
these
really nice when you
kids.
get the people that when you say that you're going to be a teacher, they're like, ah, good for you.
Yeah.
Those people, I'm like, you get it. Or there's the other people who are like, oh,
Oh, that's
a teacher.
my favorite is
yeah.
it's just like, oh, how nice for you.
Yeah.
You're such a good person. I couldn't do that.
Yeah, I couldn't ever do that. No, you couldn't. You would suck at it. Thank you.
Oh gosh.
No, yeah, the pity.
Not that I would actually
Like-
say those things to those people. Like, I just nod and smile and thinking it in my head, though.
But yeah, but I'm just having since this is our last discussion, I'm just having this whole wrap up in my head of I feel like this whole quarter, this whole quarter in
Of
this
our
class,
culture.
it's just kind of opened all of our eyes to the idea of all of the diversity and ELLs and everything that we're going to encounter within our classrooms. And it's so much more than you really think about, and that's amazing. It's awesome, and I'm so excited to dive in and get to know these students and
Yeah.
do my job. But then you talk to other people who aren't becoming teachers, and they just don't understand. And the 65-year-old white rich guys who are making laws and standards and everything for these students, and they don't even understand that ELLs are a growing population within our districts and within our culture, and they don't understand what we do.
I brought this up on purpose because it's so perfect, and you literally just set me up wonderfully for this. So I found this on Pinterest. I love Pinterest. I am addicted. And it says, so, Mr. Politician Man, you want to tie teacher salaries to the state tests? Fine. Can we tie your salary to the economy? That's basically what they're trying to do. If we were to flip it around, that's exactly what we have to do. And they'd be like, oh no, the economy's not my fault. Well, a child not being able to get this test is technically not my fault either.
That's why we gotta
If you
fight.
like friends,
That's why we gotta fight.
yeah.
So to wrap up this week, ELLs.
And just a quarter.
Oh my
Um,
so weird.
ELLs need social and academic language. They need to learn both. They need to be, quote unquote, proficient in both in order to function within this crazy society, which is unfortunate, but
Necessary.
not necessary. But they both interact really well, and I feel like the capitals interact really well, and everything just kind of rolls into this ball of everything that goes into making a student.
Everything is awesome.
And we definitely need to really take into account what we were saying before on how social language doesn't and wow,
Equal academic.
yeah, doesn't equal academic
Understanding.
language. We need to make sure that if a student doesn't understand that something we're teaching, that we somehow get through to them because just because they speak English or whatever, that they understand everything, up to par. Because I mean, honestly, this is semi-unrelated, but mathematical problems, like what was it, like, I think like 90% of why students don't do well in math is not because they can't do the math, it's because they literally don't understand the question being asked.
On the test.
Yeah, it's just
come to my mind.
like the question, it's not clear
Yeah,
or it doesn't make sense or the numbers are slightly, yeah, and it's like, how are students supposed to learn something if it's just not asked in a
The
way that
tests
makes
are
sense?
quite literally setting people up to fail.
Yeah.
And especially those who do not have a proficient academic English background, vocabulary running in their heads at all
You need
times.
teachers too. Let's write things well so people can understand that it's
feel
not
like-
ambiguous.
I feel like I'm a little biased, obviously, being an LLC major, but I think that should be a requirement to become a teacher, is to take an LLC course. That it shouldn't be an option. That you, if you're going in to be an elementary ed, you need to have an LLC major. I think, obviously, I'm biased because I am in the program now, but it would be so beneficial to have all the teachers going out there as proponents for this,
Yeah.
Yes.
for them, for the students, for the majority, because they're gonna be the majority by the time that kids are just now getting to college, that are gonna be becoming teachers. By the time they graduate and get into schools, those children are going to be the majority.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes sense.
Yeah.
Yay, LLC!
Yay for ELLs.
Hooray!
Are we
I think
done?
that's
we're done.
it.
We hit all of our questions.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Touched on
Thank you, Joy, for this quarter. We really enjoyed the content.
Been
And I
fun.
personally enjoyed the content, of course, but her posts always made us think about ourselves
Mhm.
and like reflect on our experiences, and I think that's super important to do as teachers.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Gives us the empathy to the students.
Mhm.
That you can find a connection to every
Yep,
student.
and helps us
But
realize
how?
our privileges too.
Mhm.
Joy and I
Sure.
were talking about this today in our office at our orientation.
Um,
it's, you can find a mirror in everyone. You will find something that you relate to. You will find that connection in whatever you're doing with whoever you're talking about. You just have to dig for it.
Yes.
And I feel like that's probably something that's been most beneficial.
Right.
Is that, like you said, it's like making those connections is what's important. And without it, like, you're not going to be
What's
a
the
successful
point?
teacher.
I had to do a teacher interview for my health class, and I actually did his mother because she's a preschool teacher and has been for the past 25 plus years. She had some excellent insight, by the way. I'll let you guys read the transcript of that interview if you want to. It's really good. But she talked a lot about that too. That as a teacher, you do our mirror with all those students, which makes it so that you become the chameleon, so that you can be a part of all of those cultures. And also in turn made me think about how, as a teacher, you are an actor. You have to make everything,
Oh yeah.
even if it's a subject like me for math that I can't stand, you have to make it exciting for all of those students, and you have to differentiate for every student that might not get it the way you are currently teaching. You have to be willing to do that, and you have to do it. Not even willing, you just have to do that as a teacher to be a successful teacher for these students, to be successful in their learning.
Equitable education.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Well,
Thank
thanks,
you,
Joy.
Joy.
Thank you. Have fun in Spain.
Yeah, enjoy
Yes.
Spain.
Wow,
Yes,
what?
have fun with you.
She's going to Spain.
Oh, go to
I think she
Dania.
left. I think
Go
she
to
left.
Dania. It's so good. Awesome place. Dania. Dania. It's a tiny little coastal town. If you
Barcelona.
can make there, it is fantastic. Enjoy.
Bye.
Bye, Joey.